The wire cutters slipped from Martha Clayton's trembling hands, clattering against the blood-soaked metal trap. An 800-pound grizzly bear lay motionless before her, massive chest barely rising, golden eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that stopped her breath mid-gasp. This wasn't supposed to happen, not the custom-built torture device hidden on her property, not the bear's strange calm, and certainly not the flicker of recognition that passed between them like lightning. Her neighbor's dog began howling frantically from across the valley. Birds erupted from trees in panicked flight. Even the mountain wind seemed to hold its breath. Martha's arthritic fingers found the faded scar on her palm, 20 years old, from a bear cub's playful bite. The same distinctive white patch on this giant's chest. The same intelligent, trusting eyes that had once looked up at her from a cardboard box in her barn. "Dear God," she whispered, reaching toward the trap's mechanism. Benjamin? Time was bleeding away with every heartbeat. Who had done this? And why did this feel like a test she was destined to fail? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 months earlier, Martha Clayton had stood in this same spot, watching the morning mist rise from Glacier Creek like souls departing Earth. Back then, her biggest worry was whether she could afford another winter on the ranch without Harold's pension. Now, kneeling beside an 800-pound grizzly bear bleeding to death in a makeshift torture device, those problems seemed laughably simple. At 68, Martha carried herself with the dignity of a woman who'd taught 4th grade for 40 years and buried a husband after 50 years of marriage. Her hands, weathered from decades of ranch work, still moved with the precision of someone who'd bandaged countless scraped knees and broken hearts. The Glacier Creek Ranch had been in Harold's family for 3 generations, 50 acres of pristine Montana wilderness bordering Glacier National Park, where elk grazed in meadows and eagles nested in century-old pines. But paradise came with a price tag Martha could no longer afford. Harold's 8-month battle with pancreatic cancer had drained their savings faster than a punctured water tank. Medical bills totaling $50,000 sat stacked on her kitchen table like accusatory fingers, while property tax notices threatened foreclosure by Christmas. The ranch that had once represented freedom now felt like a beautiful prison. "Love isn't love until it costs you something," Harold used to say, usually while fixing broken fence posts or nursing injured animals back to health. He'd said it the day they'd found that bear cub 20 years ago, half dead from starvation, and spent 6 months illegally nursing it back to health in their barn. Martha had cried the day they'd released Benjamin back to the wild, watching him lumber into the forest without looking back. Her son Bobby had different ideas about love's price. At 45, Robert Clayton carried the restless energy of a man who'd never found his place in the world. Divorced, estranged from his own children, and drowning in debts from failed business ventures and a gambling addiction he refused to acknowledge, Bobby saw the ranch as his salvation. Pacific Northwest Developments had offered $2.3 million for the property, enough to clear Martha's debts, secure her future, and solve Bobby's immediate problems. "Mom, you can't live out here alone forever," he'd argued just last week, pacing her kitchen like a caged animal. "Dad's gone. You're 68 years old. What happens when you fall and break a hip? When you have a heart attack? Who's going to find you?" Martha had listened to his practical concerns while watching a family of deer graze in the meadow beyond her window. Bobby saw isolation. She saw peace. He saw financial burden. She saw Harold's legacy. He saw empty land. She saw home. Dr. James Whitfield, Harold's best friend and the local wildlife veterinarian, had offered a different perspective. "Martha, this place is your sanctuary," he'd said quietly. "Don't let anyone pressure you into abandoning it." James had been quietly in love with her for 20 years, a fact everyone knew, but pretended not to notice. Now, with Benjamin's life ebbing away beneath her hands, Martha understood that some choices couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. Some prices were worth paying, regardless of cost. The morning had started like any other September day in Martha's careful routine. Coffee at sunrise, strong and black the way Harold used to make it, a slice of toast with homemade strawberry jam from last summer's garden. Then, the ritual walk around the property perimeter, checking fence lines and water sources, breathing in the crisp mountain air that still carried whispers of autumn's approach. But 30 minutes into her walk, the forest had gone unnaturally quiet. No chattering squirrels, no calling birds, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Even the ever-present hum of insects had ceased, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Martha paused beside the old oak tree where she and Harold used to sit and watch the sun set, her weathered hand instinctively reaching for the cell phone in her jacket pocket. No signal, as usual this far from the main road. That's when she'd noticed the blood. Dark drops on fallen leaves, leading deeper into the forest toward the creek. Martha's first thought had been poachers. Despite the strict regulations protecting wildlife in this area, desperate men sometimes ventured onto private property seeking trophy animals. Her second thought had been wounded deer, perhaps caught in old barbed wire from the ranch's earlier days when cattle had grazed these meadows. She'd followed the trail for nearly half a mile, her hiking boots crunching softly on pine needles and moss, before the metallic scent of fresh blood grew stronger. The silence pressed against her eardrums like a physical weight, broken only by her own breathing and the distant sound of running water from Glacier Creek. When she'd pushed through a stand of young aspen trees, Martha's world had stopped. The trap was like nothing she'd ever seen, a custom-built nightmare of metal spikes and cables designed not just to capture, but to inflict maximum suffering. Heavy steel plates formed a cage around the bear's massive body, with razor-sharp spikes positioned at strategic points to cut deeper with every movement. The mechanism was sophisticated, clearly the work of someone with both engineering knowledge and a twisted imagination. Benjamin, though she hadn't yet confirmed his identity, lay sprawled across the contraption, his thick brown fur matted with blood. The distinctive white patch on his chest rose and fell in labored breaths, each exhale accompanied by a low, whimpering sound that cut through Martha's heart like a blade. One massive paw hung at an unnatural angle, caught between two of the trap's metal jaws. What had stopped Martha cold wasn't the gore or the obvious suffering, but the bear's eyes. Instead of the wild panic she'd expected from a trapped animal, Benjamin's gaze held an almost human quality of resigned acceptance. He watched her approach without growling, without attempting to lunge or escape. His golden brown eyes tracked her movement with an intelligence that sent chills down her spine. Fresh ATV tracks in the soft earth led to and from the trap site. Someone had driven here recently, probably to check their handiwork. The tracks were deep and clear, made by heavy tires designed for rough terrain. Martha knelt beside the impressions, noting details Harold had taught her during their years of tracking wildlife on the property. The tread pattern was distinctive, aggressive lugs designed for mud and loose terrain, probably from an expensive four-wheeler. More disturbing were the other signs of human presence. Cigarette butts scattered nearby, still fresh enough to smell. An empty energy drink and tossed carelessly into the bushes. Boot prints that suggested someone had stood here for an extended period, watching. This wasn't the work of opportunistic poachers or careless hunters. Someone had planned this carefully, had invested time and money in creating this torture device, had returned to observe its effectiveness. Martha circled the trap, her teacher's mind automatically cataloging details, while her heart hammered against her ribs. The mechanism was designed to be virtually escape-proof. Traditional bear traps, illegal though they were, at least offered the possibility of chewing off a limb to escape. This contraption offered no such mercy. The more Benjamin struggled, the deeper the spikes would cut, until blood loss or exhaustion claimed him. Her cell phone remained stubbornly silent. No bars, no hope of calling for help. The nearest neighbor lived 3 miles away through rough forest terrain. By the time she could hike there and return with assistance, Benjamin would be dead. Even if she could somehow get through to emergency services, wildlife officials would likely arrive too late to save him. Standing there in the forest silence, Martha faced the same impossible choice that had defined her entire life: the safe path versus the right path. Every rational instinct screamed at her to leave immediately, to get help through proper channels, to let trained professionals handle the situation. But her heart whispered a different truth. This bear needed her now, not in 2 hours when help might arrive. The wire cutters in Harold's tool shed were a 10-minute walk away. Whether she'd have the strength to operate them, whether Benjamin would allow her close enough to try, whether they'd both survive the attempt, those were questions for later. Right now, she had a choice to make. Martha's arthritic fingers wrapped around the handle of Harold's old wire cutters, their familiar weight both comforting and terrifying. The tool shed still smelled like her husband's aftershave and motor oil, a scent that usually brought tears but now steeled her resolve. She'd also grabbed a first aid kit, bottled water, and an old tarp, inadequate supplies for what she was about to attempt, but all she had. The walk back to Benjamin felt like a march to execution. Every step through the forest brought fresh doubts. What if he panicked when she approached? What if the trap was booby-trapped? What if she accidentally triggered a mechanism that would cause more harm? Her hands shook as she pushed through the aspen grove, the wire cutters growing heavier with each stride. Benjamin hadn't moved. His massive head lifted slightly when she emerged from the trees, those intelligent eyes tracking her approach with an expression that defied everything she knew about wild animal behavior. No fear, no aggression, just waiting. As if he understood her intention and had made his own choice to trust her. Martha knelt beside the trap, her knees protesting against the damp ground. Up close, the device was even more horrifying, a masterpiece of calculated cruelty. The primary mechanism consisted of 2 hinged steel plates that had snapped shut around Benjamin's torso, with spring-loaded spikes designed to puncture deeper with every breath. His left front paw was caught in a secondary jaw that had nearly severed 2 toes. Blood seeped steadily from a dozen wounds, pooling beneath his massive frame. "Easy, boy," Martha whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm going to help you." "Just like we helped you before." The bear's ears twitched at her voice, and something extraordinary happened. Benjamin shifted his weight slightly, repositioning his body to give her better access to the trap's mechanism. The movement cost him, fresh blood welled from his wounds, but he held the position, watching her face with those impossibly expressive eyes. Martha positioned the wire cutters against the first steel cable. The metal was thick, designed to hold against enormous pressure. She squeezed the handles with all her strength, feeling the arthritis in her knuckles protest with sharp pain. The cable held. She tried again, bearing down until her vision blurred with effort. A tiny nick appeared in the metal, nothing more. Tears of frustration burned her eyes. She wasn't strong enough. 40 years of teaching children had given her patience and wisdom, but not the physical strength to cut through steel cables designed to hold an 800-pound animal. That's when Benjamin did something that would haunt her dreams and inspire her faith for the rest of her life. The massive bear somehow understood her struggle. With painful, deliberate movements, he shifted his weight again, creating tension in the cable system. The redistribution of pressure caused the very cable Martha was trying to cut to stretch taut, making it thinner and more vulnerable. "You're helping me," she breathed, understanding flooding through her. "You remember, don't you?" The wire cutters bit through the first cable with a sharp snap that echoed through the forest. Benjamin's body relaxed slightly as pressure eased from one section of the trap. Encouraged, Martha moved to the next cable, and again the bear adjusted his position to assist her efforts. They worked together in a silent partnership that transcended species. Two old souls united in a desperate battle against human cruelty. By the time she'd cut through 4 of the 6 main cables, both Martha and Benjamin were exhausted. Sweat poured down her face despite the cool mountain air, and her hands cramped around the wire cutters. Benjamin's breathing had grown more labored, though whether from blood loss or the effort of helping her she couldn't tell. The sound of an ATV engine in the distance froze them both. Benjamin's entire body went rigid, his ears flattening against his skull. A low growl rumbled from his throat, not directed at Martha, but toward the approaching sound. Someone was coming, following the same trail Martha had used. The engine note grew closer, accompanied by the crunch of tires on fallen leaves. Martha's heart hammered as she recognized the sound. She knew that particular ATV, had heard it many times over the past few months. The realization hit her like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs with its implications. The engine cut off somewhere nearby. Footsteps approached through the underbrush, confident and familiar. When Bobby emerged from the trees, his face registered shock, then anger, then something Martha had never seen in her son's eyes before. Cold calculation. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" Bobby's voice carried an edge she didn't recognize. "Get away from that animal right now." "I'm saving him," Martha replied, not moving from her position beside the trap. "Someone put him in this torture device." Bobby's eyes flicked to the partially cut cables, to the wire cutters in her hands, to Benjamin's watchful gaze. "That's dangerous, Mom. Wild animals are unpredictable when they're injured. You need to step back and let me handle this." Something in his tone made Martha look more carefully at her son. His boots were caked with mud that matched the soil around the trap site. His hands showed fresh scratches, the kind you'd get from handling metal cables. Most damning of all, Benjamin's reaction to Bobby's presence. The bear had pressed himself against the far side of the trap, as far from her son as the confines would allow. "Bobby," Martha said slowly, pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. "How did you know where to find me?" Her son's face went carefully blank. "I was looking for you. When you didn't answer your phone, I got worried and came out to check on you." But Martha had been carrying her phone all morning, and it had never rung. Bobby was lying, and they both knew it. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Benjamin whimpered softly, his strength clearly fading. 2 cables remained, and without Martha's help he would die within the hour. She looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing her child's face. "Bobby, help me get him out of this thing," Martha said, her voice steady despite the growing dread in her chest. She held out the wire cutters toward her son, testing him. 2 more cables, and he'll be free. Bobby's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, calculation, then a mask of false concern. "Mom, you can't be serious. That bear could kill you the second it's loose. We need to call Fish and Wildlife. Let the professionals handle this." "He won't hurt me," Martha said quietly, never taking her eyes off Bobby's face. "He's been helping me cut the cables. This isn't just any bear, Bobby. This is Benjamin." The name hit Bobby like a slap. His face went pale, then flushed red. "Benjamin's been dead for years, Mom. Bears don't live that long in the wild. You're having one of your episodes again." Episodes. The word stung because it wasn't entirely untrue. After Harold's death, Martha had sometimes confused past and present, called out to her husband as if he were still in the next room. But this wasn't grief-induced confusion. The scar on Benjamin's left ear, shaped like a crescent moon from where he'd caught it on a fence post as a cub. The distinctive white patch on his chest, larger now but the same pattern. The way he tilted his head when she spoke, exactly like he had 20 years ago. "I know what I'm looking at," Martha said firmly. The question is, why don't you want me to save him?" Bobby's jaw tightened. "Because that thing is dangerous, Mom. Because you're 68 years old and you shouldn't be playing with wild animals. Because—" He stopped abruptly, as if realizing he'd said too much. "Because what, Bobby?" Benjamin shifted restlessly in the trap, fresh blood seeping from his wounds. His breathing was becoming more labored. Time was running out and they both knew it. Bobby pulled out his cell phone. "I'm calling the authorities. This has gone far enough." "No signal out here," Martha said, watching her son's face carefully. "You know that. You've been coming out here enough lately." Another micro-expression. Guilt this time. Bobby's phone showed full bars, which meant he'd driven to a spot where the cell tower was accessible. He'd been lying about not being able to reach her, lying about stumbling across her by accident. "I've been checking on the property," Bobby said defensively, "making sure you're safe. A woman your age shouldn't be living alone in the middle of nowhere." "Safe from what?" Martha asked. "Bears? Or real estate developers?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Bobby's face went carefully neutral, but his hands betrayed him. They'd started shaking slightly, the way they had when he was a child caught in a lie. Benjamin made a soft, huffing sound, drawing Martha's attention. The bear was looking directly at Bobby with what could only be described as recognition and fear. Not the generalized fear a wild animal might show toward any human, but specific, personal terror. The kind of fear that came from experience. "He knows you," Martha said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's afraid of you, specifically." "That's ridiculous. All bears are afraid of humans." "Not this one. He's been letting me touch him, work around him, but the moment you showed up he tried to get as far away as possible." Martha's teacher instincts kicked in. She'd spent 40 years reading children's faces, detecting lies and hidden truths. "Bobby, what did you do?" Her son's composure finally cracked. "I didn't do anything. I'm trying to protect you. That bear has been hanging around the property for weeks, getting too comfortable around humans. Do you know what happens when the state decides a bear is a public safety threat? They don't relocate it, Mom. They put it down. So you decided to put it down yourself?" "I decided to scare it away." The words exploded out of Bobby like a dam bursting. "I set up some deterrents to keep wildlife away from the house, for your safety." "Deterrents?" Martha looked at the torture device surrounding Benjamin. "You call this a deterrent?" Bobby's face was red now, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool mountain air. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. The trap was supposed to be less intense. I bought it from some guy online, and he said it would just hold an animal until you could relocate it." "What guy online sells torture devices for bears, Bobby?" "It's not a torture device. It's a humane capture system." Benjamin whimpered, and fresh blood pooled beneath his massive frame. Nothing about his situation looked humane. "Even if I believe that," Martha said slowly, "why didn't you tell me? Why sneak around, setting traps on our own property without my knowledge?" Bobby was silent for a long moment, staring at his muddy boots. When he finally looked up, Martha saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Desperation so deep it had curdled into something ugly. "Because you wouldn't have listened," he said quietly. "Because you're so attached to this place, to the memory of Dad, to your fantasy of living out here forever, that you can't see reason anymore." "What reason?" "The reason that says a 68-year-old woman with $50,000 in medical debt can't afford to maintain 50 acres of Montana wilderness. The reason that says Pacific Northwest Developments is offering us enough money to secure your future. The reason that says wildlife on the property reduces property values and complicates development permits." There it was, the truth Martha had been dreading but expecting. Bobby's financial problems had finally driven him to this. "How much do you owe them, Bobby?" Who? Don't lie to me anymore. I raised you. I know when you're lying. How much do you owe? And to whom? Bobby's shoulders sagged. 80,000. To some people in Vegas. People who don't accept payment plans. Gambling. It started as an investment opportunity. High-stakes poker, but with professional players. I thought I could win enough to get the business back on track, pay off the divorce settlement, maybe even help you with Dad's medical bills. But the games were rigged, and by the time I figured it out, you were in too deep. They want their money by the end of the month, Mom. And if they don't get it... Bobby's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Martha felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger at Bobby's deception, heartbreak at his desperation, and underneath it all, a mother's instinctive need to protect her child, even when he'd done wrong. "So you decided to force my hand," she said. "Get rid of any wildlife that might complicate a property sale, make the ranch less appealing to me and more appealing to developers. I was trying to protect both of us. If the development deal goes through, you'll have enough money to buy a nice little house in town, close to medical facilities, and I'll have enough to pay off my debts and start over. Everyone wins. Everyone except Benjamin. It's a bear, Mom. A dangerous wild animal. It's not a person." The words hung in the air like a slap. Martha looked at Benjamin, bleeding, suffering, but still watching her with those impossibly intelligent eyes, then back at her son. "No," she said quietly. "He's not a person. He's better than most people I know." Bobby's face twisted with frustration. "You're choosing an animal over your own son. I'm choosing to do what's right. Something you seem to have forgotten how to do." Martha turned back to Benjamin and positioned the wire cutters on the 5th cable. Her son made no move to help or hinder her, just stood there breathing heavily, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. The cable snapped with a metallic ping. One more to go. "The developers are coming out tomorrow to do a final survey," Bobby said suddenly. "If they see any signs of large predators on the property, the deal's off. Not just delayed, completely dead. They're already nervous about liability issues." Martha paused with the wire cutters positioned on the final cable. "And if the deal falls through?" "Then I'm a dead man, Mom. Literally. These aren't the kind of people who accept excuses." She looked at her son, really looked at him. 45 years old, face prematurely aged by stress and poor choices, hands shaking with fear and desperation. Still her little boy, underneath all the mistakes and lies. Still the child she'd rocked to sleep, taught to ride a bike, bandaged when he fell. But she also looked at Benjamin, who had somehow survived 20 years in the wilderness and still remembered the kindness of humans, who had trusted her enough to let her approach, to help her save him, even after her own son had tried to kill him. Some choices defined who you were at your core. Some moments revealed the true measure of a person's character. Martha squeezed the wire cutters with all her remaining strength. The final cable snapped with a sound like breaking bones, and Benjamin was free. For a moment that stretched like eternity, nobody moved. The massive grizzly lay still within the open trap, his labored breathing the only sound in the forest. Martha knelt beside him, one weathered hand resting gently on his bloodied fur, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm. Bobby stood 10 feet away, his face pale with the realization of what had just happened. Then Benjamin stirred. The bear's massive head lifted slowly, golden eyes focusing on Martha's face with an intensity that took her breath away. Those eyes held depths of intelligence and emotion that seemed impossible in a wild animal. Gratitude, recognition, and something else that made Martha's chest tighten with unexpected joy. Benjamin's great black nose touched her hand so gently It might have been a butterfly landing. The gesture was deliberate, careful, achingly tender. Then, with obvious effort, the bear pushed himself up onto 3 legs, favoring the injured paw, but clearly determined to stand. "Mom, get back," Bobby whispered urgently. "He's going to—" Benjamin turned toward Bobby, and Martha felt her son's fear like a cold wind. The bear's entire demeanor changed, not to aggression exactly, but to something far more unsettling. Benjamin studied Bobby with the calculating gaze of a creature that remembered being hurt and knew exactly who had hurt him. But instead of attacking, Benjamin did something extraordinary. The massive bear positioned himself between Martha and Bobby, then sat down heavily, clearly exhausted but unmistakably protective. Blood still seeped from his wounds, but his message was crystal clear. Martha was under his protection now. "Jesus Christ," Bobby breathed, taking an involuntary step backward. Martha struggled to her feet, her knees protesting after kneeling on the forest floor for so long. Benjamin immediately shifted to support her weight, allowing her to steady herself against his massive shoulder. The gesture was so natural, so practiced, that it could only have come from deep memory. Muscle memory from 20 years ago when he was small enough for such contact to be safe. "He remembers," Martha whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He remembers everything." The sound of approaching vehicles broke the spell. Multiple engines coming fast along the fire road that led to this section of the property. Bobby's face went white as he recognized the distinctive rumble of fish and wildlife trucks mixed with the higher whine of ATV engines. "You called them," Martha said, understanding flooding through her. "When you said you were calling for help, you actually did it." "I had to," Bobby said miserably. "I couldn't let you get hurt, even if it means—" He gestured helplessly at Benjamin. The first ATV burst through the tree line, followed immediately by 2 more. Martha recognized Tom Bradley, the regional fish and wildlife supervisor, along with several officers she didn't know. Behind them came Dr. James Whitfield on his own ATV, medical kit strapped to the back, his face grim with determination. "Martha!" James called out, dismounting before his vehicle had fully stopped. "Are you hurt? We got a call about a bear attack." He stopped short when he saw Benjamin taking in the destroyed trap, the blood, and the surreal tableau of an elderly woman standing beside a massive grizzly bear who was clearly protecting her. Tom Bradley had his tranquilizer rifle out before his feet hit the ground. "Ma'am, step away from the animal slowly. Don't make any sudden movements." "No," Martha said firmly, one hand resting on Benjamin's head. "He's not going to hurt anyone." "Mrs. Clayton, that's an 800-pound grizzly bear. It's injured and potentially dangerous. You need to move away so we can handle the situation." "Handle it how?" Martha demanded. "By shooting him full of drugs and hauling him away? By euthanizing him because he's been in contact with humans?" Tom's uncomfortable expression told her everything she needed to know. Protocol was clear. Bears that showed unusual behavior around humans, especially those that had been injured in human-related incidents, were considered compromised. The safest course of action was euthanasia. "Mrs. Clayton," Tom said carefully, "we understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but that animal needs professional medical attention, and we need to ensure public safety." "His name is Benjamin," Martha said quietly. "And he's not a public safety threat. He's a victim." James had been studying the destroyed trap with the eye of someone who understood both engineering and animal behavior. "Tom, look at this device. This wasn't an accident or a natural entanglement. Someone built this specifically to torture bears." "We'll investigate the trap later," Tom replied curtly. "Right now, our priority is securing the scene and ensuring no one gets hurt." Benjamin shifted restlessly, clearly agitated by the crowd of strangers and the threatening posture of the armed men. His wounds continued to bleed, and Martha could feel tremors of weakness running through his massive frame. He needed medical attention urgently, but she also knew that the moment she stepped away from him, he would be treated as a dangerous animal rather than a patient. "Bobby," she said without turning around, "tell them the truth about the trap." Her son stood frozen, caught between his mother's expectations and his own desperate circumstances. If he admitted to setting the trap, he'd face criminal charges for animal cruelty. But if he stayed silent, Benjamin might die for his crimes. "Bobby," Martha repeated, her voice carrying the same authority that had made unruly fourth graders confess to playground transgressions. "Tell them. Bobby's voice cracked. "I bought the trap online. It was supposed to be humane, supposed to just hold the bear until we could relocate it. I never meant for it to hurt him like this." The words hit the assembled officers like a bomb. Tom Bradley's expression shifted from cautious authority to cold anger. "You set an illegal trap on your own property? Do you have any idea how many laws you've broken?" "The developers are coming tomorrow," Bobby continued miserably. "The property sale depends on no wildlife incidents. I thought if I could just scare the bears away for a few weeks." "So you decided to torture one instead?" James's voice was quiet, but his fury was unmistakable. As a veterinarian who'd spent his career treating injured wildlife, he'd seen too many victims of human cruelty. Benjamin was swaying now, his strength clearly failing. The massive bear had lost too much blood, expended too much energy, endured too much trauma. Martha felt him beginning to lean more heavily against her, and she realized with a surge of panic that he might collapse at any moment. "He needs medical attention now," she said urgently. "You can sort out the legal issues later. Right now, Benjamin is dying." Tom Bradley lowered his tranquilizer rifle slightly. "Dr. Whitfield, can you treat the animal here, or does it need to be transported?" James was already moving forward with his medical kit, his professional instincts overriding any concerns about safety. "I need to assess the wounds first. Some of these look like they've severed muscle tissue. He's definitely lost a significant amount of blood." "Will he let you approach?" Tom asked, noting how Benjamin's attention tracked James's every movement. Martha looked up at Benjamin's face, seeing intelligence and pain in equal measure. "Ben," she said softly, using the nickname she'd called him as a cub. "Dr. James wants to help you. He's a friend, remember?" The bear's ears flicked at the familiar name. Something in his posture relaxed slightly as James knelt down several feet away, moving with the careful deliberation of someone accustomed to working with frightened animals. "Hey there, big guy," James said quietly. "I remember you, too. You've gotten a lot bigger since I helped Martha release you all those years ago." Benjamin studied James for a long moment, then looked back at Martha as if seeking permission. She nodded, and the bear slowly shifted his weight to allow the veterinarian closer access to his wounds. What happened next would become the stuff of local legend. Benjamin, a wild grizzly bear with every reason to distrust humans, lay down carefully and allowed Dr. James Whitfield to examine his injuries. He flinched when James cleaned the worst wounds, huffed with discomfort when antiseptic was applied, but never once showed aggression. Instead, he watched Martha's face throughout the procedure, drawing strength from her presence. "This is impossible," Tom Bradley muttered. "Bears don't behave like this." "Most bears haven't been raised by hand for 6 months and then lived wild for 20 years, James replied, without looking up from his work. "Most bears haven't had their intelligence and emotional capacity shaped by extended human contact during their critical development period." The implications hung in the air like smoke. Benjamin wasn't just a wild animal. He was something unprecedented, a bridge between the human and natural worlds that challenged every assumption about wildlife behavior and intelligence. As James worked to stabilize Benjamin's condition, Martha found herself thinking about choices and consequences, about the price of love and the weight of responsibility. Her son had made terrible decisions driven by desperation and greed, but looking at Benjamin, bloody, exhausted, but alive and trusting, she realized that some bonds transcended human failings. Some love was strong enough to survive 20 years of separation, strong enough to overcome the worst that humans could inflict, strong enough perhaps to heal more than just physical wounds. 3 days later, Martha sat in the sterile waiting room of the Montana Wildlife Medical Center, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Through the observation window, she could see Benjamin lying motionless on a specially reinforced examination table, tubes and monitors attached to his massive frame. Dr. James Whitfield emerged from the treatment room, his surgical scrubs stained with blood, his face grave. "The surgery went as well as we could hope," James said quietly, settling into the chair beside her. "We managed to repair most of the muscle damage and remove all the metal fragments. But Martha—" He paused, struggling with words he clearly didn't want to say. "There's something else." Martha's heart sank. She'd been bracing herself for this moment since they'd brought Benjamin to the facility. "How bad is it?" "We found tumors. Multiple masses in his abdomen and chest cavity. The blood work confirms it. Benjamin has cancer, and it's advanced." The words hit Martha like a physical blow. She'd already lost Harold to this disease 8 months ago, watching helplessly as cancer consumed the man she'd loved for 50 years. Now the same monster was claiming Benjamin, the bear who'd survived 20 years in the wilderness only to be tortured by her own son and struck down by an enemy that couldn't be fought with claws or courage. "How long?" she whispered. "Without treatment. Maybe 3 months. With aggressive chemotherapy, possibly 6 to 8 months. But the treatment itself would be extremely difficult for him. The stress, the confinement, the side effects." James shook his head. "I'm not sure it would be humane." Martha closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders. Through the window, Benjamin's chest rose and fell with mechanical regularity, kept alive by machines and medications while his body fought a battle it couldn't win. "There's more," James continued reluctantly. "The State Wildlife Commission met this morning. Because of Benjamin's unusual behavior and his history of human contact, they're questioning whether he can ever be safely returned to the wild. Combined with the cancer diagnosis—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. "They want to euthanize him. They're calling it humane euthanasia for a compromised animal. The official recommendation is that Benjamin be put down within the week, before his condition deteriorates further." Martha felt something break inside her chest, a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake. First Harold, now Benjamin. Everyone she loved was being taken from her by forces beyond her control, and she was tired of feeling helpless. "What if I said no?" she asked quietly. "You don't have legal standing to object. Benjamin is classified as wildlife, not a pet. The state has jurisdiction over his care and disposition. Even though my property is where he was injured, even though he was hurt by illegal traps," James hesitated. "There might be some legal gray area there, especially given the circumstances of his injury. But Martha, even if you could challenge the state's authority, what would be the point? He's dying anyway." Through the window, Benjamin stirred slightly, his great head turning toward the observation room as if he sensed their conversation. Even unconscious and medicated, he seemed to be searching for something, searching for her. "James," Martha said slowly, an idea forming in her mind. "What if he didn't have to be in the wild or in captivity? What if there was a third option?" "What do you mean?" "My property borders the national park. 50 acres of pristine habitat where he lived as a cub, where he's been returning for months, according to Bobby. What if Benjamin could live out his remaining time there, free but cared for?" James's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, then to deep concern. Martha, you're talking about something that's never been done before. A terminally ill grizzly bear in a semi-domestic situation? The liability issues alone would be staggering. The insurance implications, the legal complications. But is it possible? Medically, I mean. Could he survive outside a clinical setting with proper support? Theoretically, yes. His immediate surgical recovery is progressing well. With pain management and regular monitoring, he could have quality of life for whatever time he has left, but the bureaucratic obstacles would be enormous. Martha stood up abruptly, her coffee cup clattering to the floor. "I'm 68 years old, James. I've spent the last 8 months watching my husband die by inches, feeling helpless and useless while the people I love suffer. I will not go through that again." "Martha." "No. I failed Harold by letting the doctors convince me that suffering was necessary, that hope was false, that the only choice was between aggressive treatment and giving up. I won't fail Benjamin the same way." She turned to face James fully, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "That bear chose to trust me 20 years ago when he was vulnerable and alone. He chose to trust me again 3 days ago when he was trapped and dying. He's shown more loyalty and courage than most humans I know, including my own son. I'm not going to abandon him now. The state will never approve it." "Then we don't ask the state, we ask the media." James stared at her. "What?" "Bobby's arrest for animal cruelty made the local news. A woman saving the bear she raised as a cub, that's the kind of story that goes viral on social media. Public pressure can move mountains, James. You know that. You're talking about putting yourself in an incredibly vulnerable position. Every animal rights group, every government agency, every lawyer looking for a high-profile case will be watching your every move." "Good," Martha said firmly. "Let them watch. Let them see what real love looks like. Let them see that some bonds are stronger than bureaucracy and more important than liability." Through the window, Benjamin's eyes opened, focusing with obvious effort on the observation room. When he saw Martha, his tail moved slightly, not the aggressive thrashing of an angry bear, but the gentle wag of a creature recognizing someone he loved. "He's awake," James observed, unnecessarily. Martha pressed her palm against the glass, and Benjamin's gaze tracked the movement. Even through the medication haze, even weakened by surgery and illness, the connection between them was unmistakable. 20 years of separation hadn't broken it. Human cruelty hadn't destroyed it. Cancer wouldn't end it. "I'm going to take him home, James," Martha said quietly. "To my property, where he belongs, where we can both face whatever comes next with dignity and love instead of cold institutional efficiency. The legal challenges can be fought. The financial costs can be managed. The media attention can be endured. But if I let them take Benjamin away from me now, if I let bureaucrats decide that his life isn't worth fighting for, I'll never forgive myself." She turned away from the window, her decision made. "I need you to tell me everything I'd need to know about caring for a terminally ill grizzly bear. Pain management, dietary requirements, warning signs of complications, everything." James was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Finally, he nodded slowly. "This is insane, you know that. The best things in life usually are. It's going to be the fight of your life." Martha smiled through her tears, thinking of Harold's words about love and its cost. "Then it's a fight worth having." The story broke on a Tuesday morning when Sarah Chen, a freelance journalist from Billings, published an article titled "The Bear Who Remembered Love" on her wildlife blog. By Wednesday, it had been picked up by 3 major news outlets. By Thursday, Martha's phone was ringing constantly, and news vans were parked along the fire road leading to her property. Martha sat on her front porch, Benjamin resting peacefully in the shade of the old oak tree just 20 feet away, and watched the circus unfold. The massive bear wore a specially designed harness that allowed for easy monitoring of his surgical sites, and seemed remarkably unconcerned by the telephoto lenses pointed in his direction. "Mrs. Clayton!" a reporter from CNN shouted across the yard. "Is it true that you're refusing to surrender the bear to state authorities?" Martha took a sip of her sweet tea and chose her words carefully. "Benjamin is recovering from surgery on my property, where he was illegally trapped and tortured. I'm providing hospice care for a terminally ill animal with the supervision of a licensed veterinarian. I'm not refusing anything. I'm simply caring for a friend." The word hospice sent a ripple through the crowd of reporters. Until now, most coverage had focused on the remarkable bond between woman and bear. The cancer diagnosis added a tragic dimension that changed the entire narrative. "How long does he have to live?" called out a reporter from Animal Planet. "Dr. Whitfield estimates 3 to 6 months depending on how he responds to palliative care," Martha replied honestly. "Benjamin is not going to recover from this illness. We're simply trying to ensure that his remaining time is comfortable and filled with dignity rather than fear." A young woman from the local paper raised her hand. "Mrs. Clayton, critics say you're putting the community at risk by harboring a dangerous wild animal. How do you respond to those concerns?" Martha looked over at Benjamin, who was contentedly chewing on a specially prepared mixture of salmon, blueberries, and pain medication that Dr. James had designed to make his treatments more palatable. The bear's gentle demeanor was evident even to casual observers. This was not a creature driven by predatory instincts or aggressive behavior. "Benjamin has been on my property for 6 days now," Martha said. "In that time, he's interacted peacefully with veterinarians, reporters, photographers, and government officials. The most aggressive thing he's done is steal a sandwich from Dr. Whitfield's lunch bag." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. "If a dying, medicated bear presents a public safety threat, then we need to reconsider what we mean by dangerous." Behind the reporters, Martha noticed a black SUV with government plates pulling up to the property line. Tom Bradley emerged from the vehicle, along with 2 men in expensive suits who had the unmistakable bearing of lawyers. Her stomach tightened. She'd been expecting this visit since the story went national. "Mrs. Clayton?" Tom called out as he approached, ignoring the reporters completely. "We need to discuss the situation." "Which situation would that be, Tom?" Martha replied sweetly. "The illegal trapping situation? The animal cruelty charges against my son? Or the fact that you want to euthanize a cancer patient?" The reporters perked up at this exchange, cameras swiveling toward the confrontation. Tom's face reddened slightly. He'd clearly hoped to handle this privately. "Ma'am, we have a court order requiring you to surrender the bear to state custody immediately," one of the lawyers announced, producing a sheaf of papers. "The animal poses a public safety risk and requires professional medical supervision." Martha stood slowly, her arthritis protesting after hours of sitting. "Benjamin is under professional medical supervision. Dr. Whitfield checks on him twice daily and adjusts his medication as needed. His condition is stable, his pain is well managed, and he's showing no signs of distress or aggression." "That's not the point," the second lawyer interjected. "Montana state law is clear about the proper handling of wild animals, especially those that have been injured in human-related incidents. The bear must be either returned to a suitable wild habitat or humanely euthanized." "Benjamin cannot be returned to the wild because he's dying," Martha said firmly. "And I will not consent to killing him simply because it's administratively convenient." Benjamin, apparently sensing the tension in the conversation, lifted his massive head and made a soft, chuffing sound. The bear's eyes moved between Martha and the government officials with obvious intelligence, and he slowly rose to his feet despite the obvious effort it cost him. Several reporters gasped and stepped backward as the 800-pound animal stood to his full height. But Benjamin simply walked over to Martha's side and sat down heavily beside her chair, his presence unmistakably protective. "Jesus," one of the cameramen muttered. "Did you see that? The bear actually positioned himself between her and the government guys." The footage of Benjamin's protective behavior would be replayed on news programs for weeks, but in the moment, Martha felt a surge of gratitude for her friend's loyalty. Even sick and medicated, Benjamin understood the dynamics of the situation and had chosen to make his allegiances clear. "The court order stands," the first lawyer said, though his voice had lost some of its authority. It was difficult to argue that a bear was dangerous when he was demonstrating calm, protective behavior on camera. "You have 24 hours to comply, or will be forced to take more aggressive action." "What kind of aggressive action?" Sarah Chen called out from the crowd of reporters. As the journalist who'd broken the story, she'd become an unofficial spokesperson for the growing number of people following Benjamin's case. The lawyers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with conducting legal negotiations in front of rolling cameras. "We're prepared to obtain additional court orders if necessary," one of them replied evasively. "You mean you're prepared to send armed officers to kill a cancer patient because he's inconvenient," Martha said bluntly. In front of a dozen news cameras. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone present understood the optics of the situation. Government officials using force against an elderly woman and her dying bear would be a public relations nightmare of epic proportions. Dr. James Whitfield chose that moment to arrive for Benjamin's afternoon medical check, pulling up in his truck with its clearly marked veterinary insignia. He took in the scene, reporters, government officials, and Benjamin sitting protectively beside Martha, and shook his head with obvious disapproval. "Gentlemen," James said as he approached with his medical bag, "I hope you're not planning to interfere with my patient's care. Benjamin has a scheduled medication administration in 15 minutes, and his recovery depends on maintaining a consistent treatment schedule." "Dr. Whitfield," Tom Bradley said through gritted teeth, "you know this situation is highly irregular. That animal should be in a controlled facility." "That animal," James replied pointedly, "is receiving better care here than he would at any zoo or wildlife facility in the state. His stress levels are minimal, his pain is well controlled, and his quality of life is excellent given the circumstances. Moving him now would likely accelerate his decline." One of the reporters raised her hand. "Dr. Whitfield, from a medical perspective, how is Benjamin doing?" James glanced at Martha, who nodded permission for him to speak freely. "Benjamin is responding well to treatment. His surgical sites are healing properly, his appetite is good, and he's showing no signs of the aggressive behavior you might expect from a wild animal in distress. In fact, his current condition is remarkably stable for a patient with his diagnosis." "How long could he continue like this?" another reporter asked. "With proper care and minimal stress, potentially several months." But any disruption to his routine, any forced relocation or traumatic intervention could significantly shorten that time frame. The implication was clear. If the government forced Benjamin's removal, they would effectively be hastening his death. Combined with the visual of an obviously peaceful bear seeking comfort from an elderly woman, the narrative had shifted decisively in Martha's favor. The lawyers huddled together for a whispered conference while cameras continued rolling. Finally, the senior attorney cleared his throat and addressed Martha directly. "Mrs. Clayton, the state is prepared to consider a temporary arrangement pending a full legal review of the situation. Dr. Whitfield would need to provide daily medical reports. You would need to accept full liability for any incidents, and there would need to be regular inspections to ensure public safety." Martha felt a surge of victory, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm willing to discuss reasonable accommodations, provided they don't interfere with Benjamin's care or cause him unnecessary stress. We'll need time to work out the details," the lawyer continued. The court order is temporarily suspended pending further review. As the government officials retreated to their vehicles, the reporters surged forward with new questions. But Martha was focused on Benjamin, who had relaxed visibly once the confrontation ended. The bear's breathing was slightly labored from the effort of standing guard, and she could see fatigue in his eyes. "All right, everyone," Dr. James announced, reading the situation perfectly. "Benjamin needs his medication and rest. We'll have another press availability tomorrow morning." As the crowd dispersed, Martha reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a lonely widow facing financial ruin and family betrayal. Now she was an unlikely celebrity fighting for the rights of a dying bear, with the eyes of the nation watching her every move. But looking at Benjamin as he settled down for his afternoon rest, his massive head resting trustingly near her feet, Martha knew she'd made the right choice. Some battles were worth fighting, regardless of the odds. Some love was worth defending, no matter the cost. 6 months later, Martha woke to find Benjamin lying motionless beneath the oak tree where he'd spent most of his final weeks. The morning sun filtered through autumn leaves, casting gentle shadows across his massive frame, but his chest no longer rose and fell with the labored breathing that had marked his declining weeks. She'd known this day was coming. Dr. James had warned her just yesterday that Benjamin's condition was deteriorating rapidly, but the finality of it still took her breath away. Martha walked slowly across the yard, her bare feet wet with dew, and knelt beside her friend's still form. Benjamin's face was peaceful, free from the pain that had increasingly plagued his final months. His great paws were relaxed, no longer tense with discomfort, and for the first time in weeks, he looked truly at rest. "Thank you," she whispered, placing her hand on his massive head one last time. "Thank you for coming back to me." "Thank you for remembering." The past 6 months had transformed both their lives in ways Martha never could have imagined. The media attention had eventually died down to a manageable level, but not before Benjamin's story had sparked a national conversation about wildlife conservation, animal intelligence, and the bonds between humans and nature. Donations had poured in from around the world, enough to cover Benjamin's medical expenses, pay off Martha's debts, and establish a wildlife sanctuary in his honor. More importantly, Benjamin's peaceful presence had healed something in Martha's heart that she'd thought was permanently broken. Caring for him had given her purpose beyond grief, hope beyond loss, and a daily reminder that love could transcend every boundary humans thought existed. The sound of a truck pulling up the drive interrupted her reverie. Dr. James emerged from his vehicle, took one look at the scene, and understood immediately. He'd been expecting this call for weeks, had prepared Martha as gently as possible for the inevitable, but seeing the reality of Benjamin's death still hit him like a physical blow. "I'm sorry, Martha," he said quietly, kneeling beside her. "I know how much he meant to you." "He's not suffering anymore," Martha replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "That's what matters. He spent his last months surrounded by love instead of dying alone in a cage." James checked Benjamin's vital signs out of professional habit, then sat back on his heels. "The preliminary necropsy will need to be performed for the state records, but I suspect we'll find that his heart simply gave out. The cancer had spread extensively in recent weeks, and his body just couldn't fight anymore." Martha nodded, having expected as much. Benjamin had been eating less, sleeping more, and showing signs of increasing discomfort despite the pain medication. Yesterday evening, he'd struggled to walk to his favorite spot beneath the oak tree, and Martha had known in her heart that he was saying goodbye. "There's something else," James said gently. "Your son called my office yesterday. He wanted to know if he could visit before this happened." "Bobby." Martha hadn't spoken to her son since his sentencing hearing 3 months ago, when he'd received 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service for animal cruelty charges. The judge had been lenient due to Bobby's cooperation with the investigation and his obvious remorse, but the rift between mother and son had seemed unbridgeable. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that was your decision to make." "But Martha, he's been attending therapy, working with a gambling addiction counselor. He's been volunteering at the Wildlife Rescue Center as part of his community service, Doctor. Rodriguez says he's genuinely trying to change." Martha looked at Benjamin's peaceful face, remembering the terror in the bear's eyes when Bobby had appeared in the forest that terrible day. But she also remembered her son as a little boy, crying when they'd had to release Benjamin 20 years ago because he'd grown too attached to the bear cub. "It's too late for Bobby to make amends to Benjamin," she said finally. "But maybe it's not too late for us to heal as a family." Over the next few hours, Martha's property filled with people who'd come to pay their respects. Sarah Chen, the journalist whose article had started it all, arrived with flowers and a promise to write Benjamin's obituary with the dignity he deserved. Several of Martha's former students, now adults with children of their own, came to offer condolences and share memories of visiting Benjamin during his recovery. Even Tom Bradley from Fish and Wildlife appeared, his official antagonism replaced by genuine respect for what Martha had accomplished. "You changed a lot of minds," he told her quietly as they stood beside Benjamin's body, "including mine. What you did here, giving him a good death instead of just ending his suffering, it matters. We're already drafting new protocols for terminal wildlife cases based on your experience." As the afternoon wore on, Martha found herself thinking about Harold and the promise she'd made to him during his final days. She'd sworn she wouldn't let anyone she loved die alone and afraid, surrounded by strangers and machines instead of comfort and dignity. With Benjamin, she'd kept that promise. The sound of another vehicle arriving made her look up. Bobby climbed out of his truck slowly, uncertainty written across his face. He'd lost weight during his legal troubles, and his hair had gone prematurely gray, making him look older than his 45 years. But his eyes held something Martha hadn't seen in years, genuine humility. "Mom," he said quietly, stopping several feet away from Benjamin's body. "I'm sorry for everything, for what I did to him, for what I put you through, for all the pain I caused." Martha studied her son's face, searching for signs of the manipulation and self-serving justification that had characterized his behavior for so long. Instead, she saw something that reminded her of the little boy who'd cried when they'd released Benjamin into the wild, genuine grief and regret. "He forgave you," Martha said finally. "In his own way. Toward the end, when you'd visit during your community service work, he stopped being afraid of you. Animals forgive more easily than humans, sometimes." Bobby's face crumpled. "I don't deserve forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable." "Maybe," Martha agreed, "but Benjamin chose to let go of his fear, and I'm choosing to let go of my anger. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying hatred is too heavy a burden for whatever time I have left." She walked over to her son and took his hand, the first physical contact they'd had in months. "Harold used to say that love isn't love until it costs you something. Benjamin taught me that forgiveness isn't forgiveness until it costs you something too." As the sun set over the Montana wilderness, Martha Clayton stood with her son beside the body of an 800-pound grizzly bear who'd remembered love across 20 years of separation and taught them both what truly mattered in life. Some bonds, she realized, were stronger than death itself. 2 years later, Martha Clayton stood at the edge of the newly dedicated Benjamin Memorial Wildlife Sanctuary, watching a group of elementary school children listen with rapt attention as their teacher explained the story of a woman and a bear who'd redefined what family could mean. The bronze statue of Benjamin, resting peacefully beneath an oak tree, had become a pilgrimage site for people seeking hope in the face of loss, proof that love could transcend every boundary humans thought existed. The sanctuary now encompassed not just Martha's original 50 acres, but an additional 200 acres purchased with donations from around the world. Visitors came daily to walk the trails, visit Benjamin's memorial, and learn about the remarkable bond that had challenged everything scientists thought they knew about animal intelligence and emotional capacity. The educational center, housed in a beautiful log building that Harold would have loved, featured interactive exhibits about wildlife conservation, animal cognition, and the healing power of interspecies relationships. Dr. James Whitfield emerged from the visitor center, his arm around Martha's shoulders in a gesture that had become natural over their 18 months of marriage. At 70 and 57 respectively, they'd found love in the aftermath of loss, their relationship built on shared grief and mutual respect rather than youthful passion. James had proposed on the first anniversary of Benjamin's death, kneeling beside the oak tree where the bear had spent his final peaceful months. "The afternoon tour group is asking if you'll speak to them," James said gently. "Apparently, there are several people dealing with terminal diagnoses in their families. They want to hear about Benjamin's final months." Martha nodded, though speaking about Benjamin's death never got easier. The requests came regularly. Families facing impossible medical decisions, caregivers struggling with guilt and helplessness, people searching for meaning in the face of inevitable loss. Benjamin's story had become a beacon for anyone grappling with end-of-life choices, a reminder that dignity and love could triumph even in death. As they walked toward the visitor center, Martha noticed a familiar figure sitting alone on one of the memorial benches. Bobby looked up as they approached, his face bearing the peaceful expression of someone who'd made genuine peace with his past. Her son had transformed dramatically over the past 2 years, his community service work at wildlife rescue centers evolving into a full-time career as a rehabilitation specialist. The gambling addiction that had nearly destroyed his life was in remission, and he'd rebuilt relationships with his own children that had been strained by years of broken promises. "The new cubs arrived this morning," Bobby reported, standing to hug his mother. 3 orphans from the Yellowstone area. They're scared and malnourished, but Dr. Martinez thinks they'll pull through with proper care. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Program had become Bobby's redemption project, his way of making amends for the suffering he'd caused. Under his care, dozens of injured and orphaned animals had been nursed back to health and returned to the wild. It wasn't atonement. Nothing could undo the torture Benjamin had endured, but it was honest work that honored the bear's memory while healing Bobby's damaged soul. "Have you named them yet?" Martha asked, knowing her son's habit of giving the animals temporary names during their recovery. "Hope, Faith, and Benjamin," Bobby replied quietly. "The smallest one, a little male with a white patch on his chest, reminds me so much of him when he was young." Martha felt tears prick her eyes, remembering the frightened cub they'd found 23 years ago. The cycle of rescue and release continued, each animal carrying forward Benjamin's legacy of trust and resilience. The afternoon speaking engagement drew a larger crowd than usual, with visitors traveling from across the country to hear Martha's message of hope and healing. She spoke about Benjamin's final months, the peaceful mornings spent watching wildlife together, the gentle way he'd accepted medical care, the quiet dignity with which he'd faced his approaching death. Most importantly, she talked about the choice between extending life and ensuring quality of life, the difference between giving up and letting go. "Benjamin taught me that love isn't about keeping someone with us as long as possible," Martha told the assembled group. "Love is about honoring their needs, their dignity, their right to a peaceful death when suffering becomes unbearable." We kept him comfortable, surrounded by familiar sights and sounds, free from the fear and confusion of a clinical environment. He died as he'd lived his final months, loved, respected, and free. A woman in the back row raised her hand, tears streaming down her face. "My husband has Alzheimer's. He's getting worse, and I don't know how to let go." "How do you know when it's time?" Martha's heart ached for the woman's pain, recognizing the same helplessness she'd felt during Harold's final battle with cancer. "You'll know," she said gently. "Not because someone tells you, but because love teaches you to recognize when holding on becomes selfishness." Benjamin chose his time and place. He waited until a beautiful morning when the sun was shining and the birds were singing, and then he simply went to sleep. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone we love is permission to let go. After the program, Martha walked the memorial trail one final time before sunset, a ritual she'd maintained since Benjamin's death. The path wound through meadows where deer grazed peacefully, past the creek where Benjamin had loved to fish for salmon, and finally to the oak tree where his bronze likeness gazed eternally toward the mountains. A small crowd had gathered around the memorial, visitors from around the world leaving flowers, notes, and small tokens of remembrance. Children drew pictures of bears and left them at the statue's base. Adults shared stories of their own beloved animals, their own experiences with loss and healing. Benjamin's story had touched something universal in the human experience, the desperate need to believe that love could conquer death, that some bonds were strong enough to survive any separation. As the sun set behind the peaks of Glacier National Park, Martha reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she'd been a bitter widow facing financial ruin and family betrayal. Today, she was a newlywed grandmother figure to dozens of rehabilitated animals, a respected voice in wildlife conservation, and living proof that life could begin again at any age. The sound of footsteps on the trail announced James's arrival for their evening walk. He carried a thermos of hot chocolate and 2 cups, another ritual they'd developed during their courtship. Together, they sat on the bench facing Benjamin's statue and watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "He would have loved seeing all this," James said quietly, gesturing toward the thriving sanctuary around them. "All the lives he's touched, all the healing he's made possible." Martha smiled, remembering Benjamin's gentle nature and remarkable intelligence. "I think he knows. Sometimes when I'm working with the new cubs or speaking to visitors, I feel him watching. Not in a supernatural way, but in the way that love never really dies. It just transforms into something larger than itself." A young family walked past on the trail, their children chattering excitedly about the bear statues and wildlife exhibits they'd seen. The little girl broke away from her parents to leave a hand-drawn picture at Benjamin's memorial, a crayon rendering of a woman and a bear sitting together under a tree, with "Love Wins" written in shaky kindergarten letters across the top. As they walked home through the peaceful sanctuary that bore Benjamin's name, Martha understood that some stories never really end. They just grow larger, touching more lives, inspiring more love, proving that even in a world often defined by cruelty and indifference, compassion could still triumph. Dear friends, Martha's story reminds us that life's greatest chapters often begin after we think our story has ended. At 68, she found new purpose, new love, and new family in the most unexpected places. Her journey with Benjamin proves that the bonds we form with family, friends, or even a gentle giant with fur and claws can give us strength to overcome any challenge. In a world that often feels divided and harsh, Martha and Benjamin's love story shows us that kindness still matters, that loyalty still exists, and that it's never too late to discover what truly makes life worth living. What unexpected friendships have brought joy to your life? Have you ever found purpose in caring for others when you thought your caregiving days were over? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.